Hey there, I'm Renee Hobbs, and welcome to the Media Education Lab. This is the last series, the last event of the Across the Generations series. And if you've been part of this community, you know that we started in November, and here we are in March. Hey, listen, do me a favor, put in the chat who you are and where you're coming in from, because what a vibrant and vigorous community we are of educators, librarians, youth media specialists, community engaged citizens. We are across the generations ourselves, and we're really excited to offer this this final program focused on intergenerational dialogue. Thanks for putting your details in the chat. We welcome you all. If you're here for the first time, or like most of you, you're here for the whole series. Yanti, do you want to share your screen?
Sure.
Or do you want me to share my screen?
I can share my screen. So
okay, so Yanti, you're leading this wonderful session on intergenerational dialogue. We started in November talking about media literacy in preschool. And then we talked about media literacy in elementary school, in middle school, in high school. Every 2 weeks or something like that, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, we'd come together and think through what are the developmental features of media literacy with this age. And after Christmas, we talked about college students. We talked about parents. We talked about older people. And in our last program, we talked about senior citizens, looking at the MediaWise curriculum and how it addressed the problem of disinformation for seniors. Today, Yanti Friesem is here to lead us in a fun activity, I think, that gets us thinking about media literacy and dialogue across the generations. Yanti, take it away, my friend.
thank you. So first of all, thank you. Sad and excited to have this session because, as we'll say in the end, we're going to start a new series. So we're ending this one, but we're going to start a new one. Renee, I cannot share my slides. I have a little computer, so it doesn't let me.
No worries, security. I can do it. Here we go. How about that? Can you see my screen now?
We're getting there. Yes.
How about that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh.
Okay. So as you know, I mean, we've gone through different topics on different specific generation, but we were thinking that it would make sense that the last one would be, how do we actually do media literacy across the generations? So that's basically what we want to talk about and do really self-reflection, because as we were going and looking, there are a lot of different programs that are trying to bring kids, like there is the Brazilian program that brings American kids to, it was then Skype, now Zoom, talk with senior citizen in Brazil who speak English. And there's different type of those kind of initiatives, but we didn't want really to share a specific initiative. We were thinking about, as you, the groupies of this webinar series, will do a reflection because you're committed to media literacy, and how does that manifest in your practice, in your, either daily life or professional life or both. So that's basically what we're going to do today, and we're going to start with our own reflection on how does that work. And Renee and I were kind of brainstorming, thinking like, okay, where really did it start, media literacy? Like, where can we point it to a moment in our early lives? And I was talking about my grandma, and my grandma immigrated to Israel from France when I was 9 years old. And then she was really like, important for her that I would speak French, which I tried to resist as a teenager getting there. So she would bring me books, and it was interesting, the differences between looking at books that would teach you French language, which I would never want to touch them. I would never do any exercise because it was so educational, versus a much better way, which was to bring me comic books from France, like Tintin or Astérix et Obélix, the Smurfs, Les Schtroumpfs. And that would really help me because it would be small sentences, and it would be very visual. And like my visual literacy kind of was grown up on looking at those comic books. And it's interesting because when I'm talking with Americans about comics, that I love comics, suddenly like comparing the DC Marvel with the French Asterix and Obelix, it's so different in the visuals, in the storyline, in the thing. So it's, again, some ways of like how I was brought up and my connection with my grandma in looking and demystifying what does that mean. Like Asterix and Obelix are basically historical, but with a current kind of commentary on it. So it was interesting to demystify how they're looking at popular culture in the 60s in France and making it related to 2000 years before during the occupation of Roman Empire of a little Gaelic kind of village. So all those things, and Tintin, which now we're looking back and seeing how racist the representation were there, looking at different places and how is that. So all of that education and communicating was super interesting. And one of the last thing I'm going to share was the Saturday night movie. So in Israel, there was a big population in the 80s of French immigrants. And because Saturday is the Sabbath, you're not supposed to watch TV. So the Jewish kind of broadcast was not done like on the Sabbath. It was the Arabic kind of portion of the TV. And at the end of the Sabbath was always like a movie that was kind of like in between, and they put a French movie. So there was an Egyptian or Turkish movie in Friday night or in the afternoon, but in Saturday night, it was a French movie, and usually it would be a Holocaust movie, which you would think like as a kid, it was like, why are you watching this? But that was part of my education and media literacy education in the sense of like, this is my heritage. This is what my grandparents went through. And as we were looking at those, some fiction, some documentary, I had tons of questions as a curious child, adolescent, and it would kind of go across with their self-stories of surviving the Holocaust of my grandparents, watching with me the movies and validating what was fiction, what was not, and discussing historical events, comparing with that. So that's, again, this is like beginning of introduction to kind of like my love of like movies, comics, visual literacy, understanding historical and perspective as an intercultural dialogue with my grandparents, speaking in French in Israel. So a lot to unpack there. But now to demonstrate another one, we're going to move to Renee, who will talk about how her grandma impacted her.
Got it. Got it. I have so many stories to tell about my grandma Irene, but I only tell one story. So my grandma Irene was quite a radical. She lived in rural Appalachia in Pennsylvania in a little town called Minersville. And she was the daughter of Italian immigrants who moved there to work the coal mines. And my grandmother used media in a very different way than I did. And I was absolutely intrigued by the radio dramas that she listened to. And when I was growing up, you could still occasionally hear these radio dramas. And also, of course, there were the TV, we used to call them soap operas. I don't know if you ever watched a soap opera, but my grandmother was very fond of them. She called them my stories. And she explained to me that before there were TV soap operas, there were radio soap operas. And she liked those better than the TV soap operas because she felt like she could project herself into the story better through listening. And so we used to listen to those radio soap operas, and I recognized that my grandmother had a lot of fantasies, and that she wished for things to be different in her life than her life turned out to be. So it was kind of an escape that was very thrilling for her. And she also was very fond of those celebrity magazines, and my mother would not allow the celebrity magazines to be in our house even. My mother hated them. But when I went to my grandmother's house, I could read the Star magazine, and she even read World Weekly News and those really terrible tabloids that I knew were untrue, like, Elvis is really a bat, and stuff like that. And so I recognized that my grandmother's need for thrill and sensation and escape were different motivations than how my parents used media, which was much more focused on information. So my grandma taught me about escape and the power of listening.
Thank you. So what we demonstrated now is what we want you to do for the next 10 minutes. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms. It's a little bit different than the usual, but so we're going to go into breakout rooms so that you can share what you learned from your grandparents, and then we'll come back to do the second activity and talk about another way of intergenerational dialogue through media literacy.
Yanti, how many people do you want in these breakout rooms? 2 or 3 small groups?
Yes, small, because we have 10 minutes. So I would say
okay,
3.
good show. This first conversation is a short conversation. You're just talking about your grandparents. Give me a thumbs up if you understand what's going on in this breakout room. Make a new friend, talk about your grandma, what your grandma taught you about media and media literacy. This looks pretty good. Rooms are open. We'll see you back in about 10 minutes.
What do you do with YouTube? Do you?
Hold on. I'm going to move some people around a little bit. I'm going to move Regina. Into room 2. I am going to move Jeffrey into, okay, now it looks like we're good here. Who's alone? Anybody alone? No, it looks like they're good. 2 or 3 people in a group.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for folks here who are in the main room, why don't we just chat with you? Lynn.
Lynn said she's going,
Lynn's working.
and coming back. Yeah.
Okay.
But we have Rosemary, Ciara, and
yeah,
Francia.
Tell us about your grandmothers, Rosemary, Ciara.
I think Rosemary's driving and Ciara doesn't have audio.
Ah, thank you.
So, Francia, do you want to tell us?
Sure. So my grandpa used to read newspapers like every single day religiously. And I never realized that kind of influenced me to be into reading the news more than watching the news, because he used to like read rather than watch TV news. And now I'm like, oh, funny thing, I'm now working in a newspaper. So yeah.
Can you close your eyes and visualize where your grandpa was reading the newspaper and how he read a newspaper? Can you visualize it in your mind?
Yes, it was always in his like chair upstairs. He had like a sunroom, and he always had like, I don't know, like 4 newspapers. He would buy different ones.
Wow. That's another interesting media literacy thing, isn't it? That he would read multiple newspapers.
Yes, maybe he was onto something, trying to get different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Most major cities back in the day had a morning newspaper and a nighttime newspaper, right? So you could read two newspapers from most American cities back a long time ago.
Yeah.
I remember my grandma reading the local Minersville, whatever it was called, the local Minersville paper, but all it was obituaries. I remember thinking, why is she so interested in reading these obituaries? But it's like, well, they were all her friends, right?
They were obsessed with the obituaries. I'm sorry, I'm back. I was pushing the wrong buttons while I was driving, but.
Rosemary, what about your grandma? What did you learn about media or media literacy from your grandma?
You know, my mother's mother literally should have been a saint or a nun or something like that, because she would read the parish bulletin like they were her news. That's where she got her news. And back in the day in Valley Stream, Long Island, the bulletins, the parish bulletins, you could get them daily if you walked to the church. So she knew who was sick, who needed prayers, and it was all, you know, who needed chicken noodle soup brought to them, her German chicken noodle soup or roasted potatoes, you know. So it was really largely faith-based. But my grandfather, who I never met because he passed away a few months before I was born, was an avid New York Times reader. And when he met my father, he fell in love with my father, who was a Daily News guy. So, you know, they would have these conversations, is what I'm told, about, you know, how liberal the New York Times was becoming and how right the Daily News was. And then it kind of reversed, because as we all know, the Daily News kind of went very left and the New York Times went very right for a while there. So it's funny that we're having these same conversations about bias in the news. And this is, heck, 60 years later, right?
Wow.
70 years later.
Wow. Those are two very, very beautiful stories, Rosemary. And I really appreciate the story about your mom and the parish bulletin. And it makes me think about how much that little newsletter was creating community, right? And that sense of community identity, that's with the fragmentation of media, people's communities are like smaller and smaller, but this was an example of a small community where the newsletter was a way to feel part of this very special club, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Faith just joined. So Faith, we're talking about what we learned from our grandma.
About media or media literacy.
Hi, sorry, was having computer glitches, so I missed the earlier stuff. I didn't spend a whole lot of time with my grandparents, but I was close to a great aunt, and she worked for the Jewish Daily Forward. So one of the things, as a very young child, I mean, we're talking like preschool young child, she had a typewriter that was in Yiddish characters because she worked for the Forward. I now own that typewriter. It's one of my precious possessions. But I remember playing with it as a kid. So I think maybe my earliest kind of influence was like, we pretended to be these people working for the Jewish Daily Forward, playing on the typewriter but also, you know, because she worked for the Forward, there were frequent discussions around what was happening and how the Forward it kind of created, you were saying before, the earlier story that I mostly missed, creating community. And in my family, it was split. So it was, the Forward had a very particular, very leftist agenda. my aunt, great aunt, identified as a socialist, and a whole segment of my family, including my parents, didn't. They did not subscribe to the forward in my lifetime. They were not. So it gave me insight into oh, if I only read the stuff my parents got and did their media, I would have access to one whole world. The forwards world was something completely different.
What a great story. What a great story. All right, Yanti, I have closed the rooms. They're going to come back in 60 seconds. I think we're going to have to take some time to process these very rich reflections. This was amazing. Also, the way in which both of your stories, Faith and Rosemary, both illustrate stuff we think of as new is kind of not so new. So that, I think, was a very powerful insight from that activity. Things we thought were new were actually have been happening for a long, long time. How
and
totally
I appreciated the story with the typewriting. It made me remind that my grandpa also had it, and I would love to play with it. And then he moved to the IBM computer, like the Commodore kind of thing. That was like, ooh, okay.
Looks like people are coming back from the breakout rooms. They're coming back. They're coming back. They're coming back. They're back. It's wonderful. I hope you had a great conversation. We'd like to have some synthesis and reflections on the stories you encountered. Who'd like to share?
Oh, I'll share. Carla, who is from Brazil, spoke about her life with her grandmothers. One of them made Italian food, and I told her I need her address. I'm just going to come and visit. And her other grandmother was like one of the first to vote, you know, from that era. And I think she was the one that lived with them. Jeff talked about how his grandmother watched certain television programs, which I was the same, and especially Lawrence Welk on Saturday night. The grandmothers would watch those programs. And we also talked a little politics. How could I resist Carla from Brazil? You know, what's happening? Hopefully the Amazon is feeling better with Lula in power. It's never long enough. It's just never
Thank
long.
you. Thank you so much for sharing. What insights emerged from your discussion? Donna. Turn your microphone on.
I was telling her, I will recap this, but you would love this. It's a media literacy group. Now, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay. Yeah, William and I were only two people in a room, and it was amazing how our experiences both lived in New York State. I was upstate farming area, not so with William, but I'll let him tell his side of it. But what he said that blew my mind was the fact that reading the New York Times, you didn't just open it up like this. That was the media for him because his grandparents weren't alive when he was growing up. And so I thought, oh yeah, that's right. When I finally went to New York City, I would see people on the trains when I was first year teaching in upstate New York, and they would have these New York Times all folded up in tight little ways. And I always assumed it was so you didn't have to rub or touch shoulders with somebody else, but it was a different reason. So that's how we got started. My grandmother was just like yours, Renee. She absolutely taught me the racier side of life. And my mother was just appalled that I would like to read the things like the Reader's Digest that my grandmother subscribed to. So that was the insight.
Thank you for sharing. Next up, Claude, what was one insight that happened in your group that you'd like to share?
Hello, Renee, and hi, everyone. The centrality of the emerging technology of television. So I too, and I think Christy testified to this as well, those soap operas and stories were a really central, like, entertainment vehicle. And then I started thinking, because my grandmother always talked about her stories as well, But then I also reflected on wrestling. Cannot forget about wrestling. The 1940s and 50s, as television emerged, wrestling was so entertaining, and my grandmother was like a regular viewer of that as well. So I think we spent a lot of our time just talking about how television emerged and like sort of went from new technology, how people were pretty, hesitant to engage it as technology, and then how it emerged into a really central form of entertainment and education.
Huge, huge. And thanks for jogging my memory about wrestling. Jeffrey, Cameron, and Regina, the floor is open. What was an insight that came up from your conversation?
I just talked with Heather, who's now in New Mexico, and she shared about her experience with her grandparents. And the one thing I was so enjoy was her grandma was actually struggling with the answering machine. So, and then she said, "It's too inconvenient. Why do I need to use it?" And now she's experiencing, whenever she needs to communicate with the younger generation, that she needs to text them. Like, why do I need to text him, not really talk to you directly? So it's more like now we're understanding our grandparents' perspectives as like a middle generation. And another insight was we actually have more media experiences, more not really like electronic media, but more crafting, storytelling, or just playing games. Just more have a physical bonding experience. But these days, everything is like digitally connected. And so we kind of need need to find a way to make a bridge between us and also the next generation. That's what I thought was interesting.
Thank you, Regina. In the slide for I don't know, Renee, if you can share for a second, I put different images, and two images there are not digital media on purpose, because again, as we define media, it can be, to learn how to knit the next one, or different kind of art that you would do like with your grandma. So because we're reverting all the time to digital media or TV or newspaper, but there's different types of media that we can learn some craft or other things. So thank you for sharing that. And anybody
Floor
else?
is open for two more participants.
So
Jeff?
I'll make a quick comment, not so much about what I learned from my grandmother, but to kind of reflecting on what Yanti was saying. So comic books were really important for me. My parents would let us buy as many comic books as we wanted. So we had a stack of probably like 400 comic books, which I would read and reread. And I really think that it developed my love of reading, which I still very avidly practice and facilitated. I could read by the time I was 5 years old, actually. And I think that probably, and so for my kids, any comic books you want, and they had Asterisk and Tintin and the ones you were talking about, which were great. So just throw that in there.
Thank you for sharing. Cameron?
Our group, they helped jog my memory because I'm trying to deprocess from being in elementary school today. But we talked about our grandmothers watching game shows and what else? I talked about my grandmother came to live with us, and my mom didn't like us watching game shows. She only wanted us reading or something else. But when my grandmother came to live with us, we could watch Wheel of Fortune and so forth. So that was exciting, and old Westerns and what else? Oh, like Perry Mason. So I felt like I was doing a little bit of problem solving on Price of Right, a little math, and getting some benefit from Wheel of Fortune using my brain. But mom did not like that. And somebody, I can't remember who was in my group, had TV on during dinner, and it was a news program. And it was interesting because we were not allowed to have any kind of media on during dinner. So
really interesting observation that different generations have different ideas of what they approve of and disapprove of, right? And we can hear that theme across all of these things. Hey, well, Yanti, you have another discussion protocol for us to follow. Shall we move to that so we can have time for it? Because I think this is going to blow your mind.
So we're going to have 20 minutes to talk in, and Renee, maybe at this time you put some groups together So
Yep.
it's a little bit more people. So
Yep.
what we want you to look at, I'm going to put in the chat like those questions. You can see them in the chat now as well. So the chat would save when you move to the breakout room, so you can look at them. You choose one of those and then you discuss kind of, you know, how do you think as media literacy educators, you would tackle one of those? You would either teach or experience, or you would write an exercise, or however you would think to do. You're going to be put in a breakout room, and then the breakout room will discuss and choose one of those topics. Okay, so we'll see you in 20 minutes, and then we'll do a reflection on this exercise, the whole series, and what's coming next. So as Renee asked, everybody understands, or are we good? Okay.
So you pick a topic and you explore it. Hold on, I'm just going to set these up. We're going to just make them just a little bit bigger group because we think that will be useful for this kind of activity. I'm almost ready for you here. This is harder than it looks, you guys. 3 or 4 people in a group. Have a great conversation. We'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Uh-oh. Okay, yeah, there we go.
I didn't get, did I get to any new group?
Oh,
No.
Perry's on. Let me assign you. Hold on just a second. I'm going to put you here. You should get an invitation right now.
All right, I got it.
Who else needs an invitation? Okay, Perizat has her room. I've got 3 in each room. I'm going to go into room 2 with Heather and Regina. All right. I'll see you later.
Okay, sounds good. So I don't know here, Sierra, Rosemary, or Francia, if you want to discuss one of those topics. If you cannot see, I can let you know. One is, what is the future of AI or machine learning algorithms? How has crime TV drama evolved over time? Third one is, what can video games offer to younger and older generations? The fourth one is, which movie genre is your favorite and why? And then the last one is, who is a musician whose work is meaningful for you? Hello, Paula. I'm going to put you in a breakout rooms. They'll explain to you what to do. Is that okay? No worry, Rosemary. Okay, so how has crime TV drama evolved over time? So, Francia. You want to say, like, what would you do? How would you use it? Okay, which Chicago PD? What? I'm not familiar with that one. Oh, wow. See? Wow, really. So how can you use it? Well, not surprising that they depict questions of race and police brutality with all the awareness, but how, like, if you analyze it, how would you look at it from a media literacy perspective? Like, what would you do as an activity to see and analyze, like, how they're like depicting those portraits of race and police brutality in a crime TV show as it relates to what's happening in society in the last several years, and the awareness and different campaigns about it? So evaluating individual portrait, are you saying individual like characters? So to see how they're showing like characters, or like how the story of episode? Both, okay. Yeah, so looking at how each one of the character is being portrayed. So like how they're dressed, how they're acting, their like story arc, but then also how it works with the episode itself, and what's the conclusion, and what's the kind of happening to the character, and how it relates to other character, and is there diversity in the depiction, or it's kind of just stigmatic to like one representation of a certain kind. Okay. Now, who would you do it with and how? Like, would you do it as a lesson, or would you sit and watch like at home with family members? How would you do it? Mm-hmm. So there is Common Sense Media has those guides for parents and kids, like how to have a discussion over a movie. We also at the Media Education Lab have some guides for that in general, while Common Sense Media has more like specific for specific movies or specific episodes or TV series, doing this kind of analysis. Yeah, everybody can bring their perspective. Obviously, if you would do this analysis with different generation and different people, they would give different understanding of it, which would be interesting, because your historical and personal cultural background would be different than your grandparents or your parents. Some would be aligned, but some might not, and they can give you a different perspective that you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think about that. So yes, that would be great to have this discussion with different family members, because although it's the same family, but still there is some things about culture that might be different, and some historical perspective that different members would have. So I think that's a great idea. Interesting. Why did you choose the crime, the question number 2 with the crime? Why was this interesting for you specifically? Oh, okay. So because you're a fan and you're watching it with your mom. Now, I'm curious, is like in Israel, for example, there's hardly ever like produced. There's some, but really tiny. Most of it's brought from the US with subtitles. So usually in Israel, I grew up with, American crime TV that is recent, like they would bring things from the same year and kind of look at it. How was for you? Like, would you watch like original crime TV, or would it be like imported from the US with either dubbing or subtitles? Okay, so the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the TV Hollywood dominates the media quite a lot. So yeah, and it's interesting because culturally there are things like in translation that can't always be translated. And that's another thing that can be also done, is kind of looking at the translation or how that works. Because sometimes there's some issues of cultural adaptation that cannot be translated. And there is some kind of things that might be weird for the audience that doesn't understand some concepts that seems logical for US viewers, but people who are abroad might not understand them. So it's an interesting discussion also about intercultural interpretations of media messages and the translation of them. Yeah, so it's different when you're listening to in Spanish. Yeah. Lisa had work, she has an article about the difference between the adaptation of The Simpsons, because in Russian TV, it would be dubbed, but then one time she heard the original in English and it was so different, and that made her realize that there is discrepancies between when you dub and the way that the story is a little bit different than the original, and some jokes are going away. In Israel, usually most of the stuff are not dubbed unless it's like animated movies in the cinema for kids. So most of it is with subtitles. So the subtitles can distort it as well, but still you hear the original soundtrack, but not always. Like in Europe, usually it's dubbed into the language. So there's a lot of places. Yeah, so American humor can be unique and again, nuances of cultural things. So that's, again, a big media literacy activity to look at those changes and different interpretations. Yeah, good. So that sounds like an interesting activity to do. I'm wondering, like, if you said that you grew up with crime TV series and looking at it, and with the influence of your grandpa, like looking at news, like when you're working as a news reporter, does that influence you? Like, do you see yourself as part of this crime TV drama, being the reporter reporting on different things? Oh, it's very different because you're doing more like cultural kind of reporting. Okay, good for you that you don't have much crime to do or reporting. I'm sure it would influence your views if you would do it. Yeah. Good. So any of the other, I'm looking at the questions. Sorry. What is the future of AI or machine learning algorithm, for example? Or what can video games offer to younger and older generation? Or genre movie favorite? Or musician work is meaningful for you? Like I put the Michael Jackson evolution kind of caricature there. I'm gonna write to everybody. Okay, so why is the AI interesting? Yes, it is the hot topic of media and business world, the AI and how different AI might go and do, and what's happening with that. So the question is, how would you explain it to older generation or younger generation? I wonder, how do you show like older generation the concept of calculator, how to use formulas and automatically calculate numbers? Like ChatGPT is basically an algorithm of crowdsourcing like words and putting them together with a sophisticated, basically, calculation. But how do you show it? How it actually, because it's very abstract notion if you're not looking into the actual algorithm. But if you're not a mathematician, you might not understand what this algorithm mean and how does it work. It's pretty sophisticated. Yes, the core principles. But it's still kind of like for example, ChatGPT cannot cite real citation. It's usually invent citation, and to explain to students or to other people that it's actually not reliable, that it's not a real citation. Like, although it's written in that way, it sounds very persuasive, but it's not true. And that makes it kind of problematic to explain, because again, it's abstract, and to explain how ChatGPT or other AI chat box are. So it's tricky. And that's why we're going to have a webinar series about it. No, no easy answers for that. Yep. Okay, so I think we're gonna close the rooms and bring everybody back. Nobody wants to finish the conversation. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. It's always a good sign when people don't want to come out of their breakout rooms and then be yanked into the main forum. So, you know, so I know 20 minutes was not enough, but we want to have some time for synthesis and say thank you. So, you know, 10 minutes is not much, but at least to kind of, so anybody wants to share what was one of the 5 topics that you chose and what was the discussion about? What did you come up with, wrestle with? we're in wrestling today. So thank you, Claude. We're all thinking about wrestling now on TV. Anybody wants to share the discussion in your group? Catherine.
So we kind of combined some of the ones. So the television, music, there was like 3 of them that were kind of media genres. And we talked a lot about identity representation in media. So we kind of went down that path. And Amy shared how she has a biracial child, and she has been noticing much more, many more resources and opportunities and representations of kids of different colors and different books out there and different things, but still they live in the country, and there's no little brown girls in the country. They're always in the city. So even though we make strides, we still got to keep thinking about how does that media drive, how is identity representation in media, how does that affect how we feel about the media that we're watching and using. So
Thank you, Catherine. Anybody else?
Well, our group made me the spokesperson because I was taking notes, I think. But we were all over the place. We started with AI, decided it was overwhelming. And then we talked about, let's see, crime, and decided it just become more realistic. And we ended up on video games benefits. And I think we broadly defined it because we talked about like gamifying learning for kids, for younger kids, but then also in work, sometimes they'll gamify something so you can learn about something, like cybersecurity was given as an example. And then we talked about using it maybe to monitor our health, getting people to get physically active. An example was given the Wii to get people in nursing homes active. And then we talked about some examples like our generations used to do, like crosswords, or maybe still do, but now there's a game where you can gamify that with Wordle. And I gave the example of my mom teaching my kids how to play bridge when they were in different locations. We went online and played a video game of bridge. So you may not think of that as video gaming, but there's all different kinds. And finally, someone mentioned that solitaire. I told them my grandmother used to play solitaire, and they mentioned that maybe when you're physical, you can't like deal cards anymore. Maybe it's easier to do it on a digital device. So we were just all over the place talking about interacting with others, using video games to interact with others near or far, during COVID, improving your skills, piquing interest in something. Group, if I left something out, please jump in.
Thank you. And thank you, Saripali, for, I don't know if you want to elaborate on your granddaughter on 3rd grade writing a book on climate.
Definitely, sir. She is 8 years old. She is in the College Station, Texas. Her father is a robotics, artificial intelligence professor in Texas A&M. So she wrote a very nice book on the climate, and she made the book out of the games she was playing, nothing more. And in fact, she wrote, I think, 4 or 5 chapters from the 5 or 6 games she was playing, including small games which 8-year-old normally plays. Minecraft and such sort of games. She said, why it can't be a green climate? Why I should be punished? Why I cannot have a greenery everywhere? That's what she went on writing, and she wrote not less than 2-3 pages for each chapter, and she already wrote 5-6 chapters.
Wow,
I'll
that's
pass
a
on
beautiful
sometime.
story. Thank you
I
for
will pass on
sharing.
to you.
One thing that happened in our group that I absolutely have to call out is that we imagined the comparison between ChatGPT and an older technology that some of you remember called Photoshop. Do you remember the first time you used Photoshop? You could manipulate images. Oh my God. You could create unreal realities. Oh my God. And so when I started thinking about comparing, like when old technologies were new, I can't help but think that that might help us like damp down some of the fear and the protectionism and just kind of put things in perspective around how flexibly we adapt to all
Professor,
kinds of technologies.
Professor, I thought she used ChatGPT, but in the end, when she has explained, I understood she wrote it on her own, imagining everything. And in fact, she wrote about Mahatma Gandhi also. She said 3 times he was nominated to Nobel Prize and he was denied. So I understood she went to Google, searched all the things and made it. So it's good that the very, very small kids are able to grasp what is happening in the world. And we have to give ideas to them, allow them to prosper, and accept what they also feel. So technology is for us, and the technology is not for somebody. If necessary, we have to, continue using a sort of computer-free institutes in every city for the older or the middle age or whatever age we call it, to train them a little bit, either freely or by cost. So that is most important. We should not leave them. They are part of the society.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so useful. And how beautiful for you to help us conclude our Across the Generations series, because we were not only across the generations over the last 6 months, we were also all around the world. You coming to us from India, and you coming to us from Georgia, you coming to us from New York. We actually really benefit from our across the world conversations. And Yanti, I want to thank you for giving us some really fun discussion questions and activities that might inspire us to do intergenerational dialogue in our own communities, with our family, with our friends, and with the people we care about in our work and in our lives and in our citizenships. But I also want to make sure to thank the presenters for this whole series. We have been on a journey. And so a special call out, shout out, thank you to Faith Rogo, Kristen Zimke, Troy Hicks, Adam Maxwell, Teresa Redmond, Alicia Haywood. Of course, I did one, and Yanti, you brought it all home. Our series is a great way to have what we like to call a slow conversation. Gathering, as we do every couple of weeks or even once a month, for a session that coming back and seeing some of the same people coming back again, it deepens our own sense of professional identity, gives us lots of insights to think about, builds our leadership skills. But Yanti, I think you want to use the next few minutes for getting people ready for what's next. What's next?
Yes, before we get to that, I just want Jeffrey 1 minute, if you want, just to share what you wanted to share, and then we'll get to what's next.
Sure, just a real quick thing. I appreciate the adaptation that Renee was talking about. At the same time, I feel like I have to kind of put out for the other side. C.H. Waddington said that one of the tragedies about humanity was our ability to adapt to situations that were worsening. And, you know, in terms of like the climate and, you know, and species loss, I think that's it's not always a good thing to adapt.
Great point. Beautiful. Thank you so much. That's a good balance. I think a good balance to keep in mind.
So as everybody discussed about it, AI is, you know, not new, but the big thing now. So what we're going to do is we're going to have, and we have lined up already of 4 workshop coming up in March and April, and it's going to go for several months as well. So we're going to do on different aspects of AI in the classroom.
I just sent you ours too. So
yeah,
we're good.
It included.
Okay,
yes.
good.
So we're going to have algorithmic literacy, how to use ChatGPT on different aspects of it, copyright about ChatGPT. So all the questions that we're struggling with from a media literacy perspective, the same concept of introducing the topic and then having our breakout room and discussion. So the first one will be on April 11th, and we're gonna start, announcing it as we go. And 2 other webinars that we welcome you to come and be. One on a new platform called Information, about social and emotional support using data kind of sourcing from Ariel Dagan, our librarian. And another one, Heather, inspired by your question to me about social media. We have a crowdsourced gathering about the affordances and challenges of social media that we'll do it as a group together to understand, because there's not a list that helps us. It's always per like the social media. So understanding how to teach social media in a media literacy framework. So again, thank you so much. Very exciting to be part of this series and looking forward to the next one. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Great seeing you.
Thank you
so much. This always puts a
so much.
smile on my face coming to these conversations. I love it. I just can't get enough. And someone in the chat, Karen, asked if there's a link to the series.
Not yet. We're gonna create it and announce it very soon. So see you all.
Keep warm and don't slip. It's the quote of the day from the New York Times. They never print.